You're listening to The Sacred Sofa, a podcast that explores all things theology and therapy. My name is Grace Brown. I'm a registered psychotherapist, certified Canadian counselor, and owner of Journey with Grace Counseling Services.
And I'm Brad Watson, pastor of Nexus Church and author of the book, A Path Called Compelling. Welcome to The Sacred Sofa.
Sacred Sofa listeners, we are excited because there are just 2 weeks left until we are bringing you all new episodes starting September 12th. But for now, we are airing previously recorded episodes.
Last week, we looked at the cult of speed, and today, this is an episode about all the ways we can redeem time. We hope you enjoy. Our last podcast, we talked about the cult of speed that we all live in and how everything feels in a hurry because of technological speed up, social norms speeding up the pace of life. So this week, we're going to talk about, are there ways to redeem time? And one of the first things that I mentioned, Grace, was that time needs a story. To give time meaning, we need to have a story behind it. And I talked a little bit about how at least the Canadian national calendar is a bit random in terms of the things we observe. It doesn't really tell a coherent story. But that reminds me, today is actually, Grace, American Thanksgiving. And as a dual citizen,
Yes.
I thought I would say happy Thanksgiving to you.
Thank you.
Yes. Now, I know when it comes to hockey, you're always on the Canadian side. Is that right there, Grace?
Sure. Well, sure, Brad.
Sure.
I'll give you that one.
Okay.
You know,
All right.
To be frank, Canadian hockey generally tends to be better than American hockey, but, we got to take you on the summer events, though.
Oh, summer events. So that seems fair. That seems fair. But yeah, I mean, even that's an odd thing, right? And Thanksgiving is, of course, a bit of a complicated holiday, but in Canada, we celebrate it early October, end of November for Americans. So even there's not a consistency.
No.
And, when you think through our calendar year, again, it's just a bit of a random bunch of days off. Some of them have a bit of a religious tinge to them. Others are just random, maybe shopping holidays, that sort of thing.
Yes, marketing and
Yes.
materialism.
Yes. So there's not really a coherent story. And if there is one, maybe commerce is behind it. But I talked about how the Jesus path at least gives us, if we'll allow it and travel it, give us a bit of a story to walk with. And that's, I think, the beginning of starting to help us redeem time in an age where we're constantly feeling like we need to speed up. So we'll get into maybe a bit of all of that. Any sort of opening reflections from you just on the nature of time and maybe the way our calendars shape our time for us?
We'll talk about this a bit further in the podcast, but, you're talking largely about a societal influence that is influencing how we respond to time or a calendar. And one of the things I think is important is that the only way to mark time by external influences. And I think we're going to speak very clearly throughout our podcast, and especially towards the end, on, is there a way for us to be more intentional with time? Let's get into it. Let's talk about that.
Right. Well, I sort of took us on a bit of a theological journey and sort of establishing from Jesus' path worldview, we are first and foremost citizens of heaven. Now, heaven, of course, that's a bit of perhaps a foreign concept. Maybe some of us don't believe in heaven. What does that even look like? But, very quickly, without getting too sci-fi, the idea within the Christian worldview is that there's actually two worlds: material world that we exist in, and the heavenly realm where the good, the true, the beautiful lives in harmony and perfection. It's not far away, way up in the sky. It's close to us. We can have access to that. But it's that realm that sort of informs, if we'll allow it, the way we see time, how we live out our days. And specifically, we'll get to Sabbath in a second, how that influences time. But one of the first challenges, I think, is if you're struggling to believe in heaven or that realm, then it's hard to live into anything beyond the material world. And then it's easy to fall into the cult of speed, always be speeding up. So one of the first challenges, I think, is trying to remind ourselves that beyond the five senses, the material world, there is something other. And I'm curious how that might be received or be thought of with a therapeutic lens.
Well, this is the lens with which I think about it, especially in terms of listening to your sermon and some of the discussions we've had. But when we focus so much on what we believe in that we can see and touch and feel, I automatically think about love. Can it truly be seen? I believe that there's something very mystical and transcendent about this thing that so many songs are talked about, sculptures are, commissioned on behalf of. What is this thing we call love? And I got to be honest, Brad, I have this program that I watch, this reality show that I watch regularly at the bemusement of my children. Have you ever seen Married at First Sight?
I haven't. I need to get on this train, I think.
So it's called Married at First Sight, and it's an 8-week experiment. And, folks write into the experts. There's a sex educator and therapist, there's a psychotherapist, social worker, and then there's actually a pastor. So he provides spiritual guidance and so the people write in and give their profiles and fill out all the assessments and whatnot. And these 3 experts match the couples, and then they meet each other for the very first time at the altar. And they have a legally binding marriage. Ooh. And then they have 8 weeks to decide whether they want to continue the marriage or get a divorce.
Oh, that's quite the social experiment.
Quite the social experience. I think it's in 16 seasons now. So okay. It's been going on a while. And what I find fascinating is if everyone is actually being honest about themselves as they fill out these assessments, on paper, they should match. But most often, as real life starts to show up through the experiment, you can find that these people aren't matching. And sometimes the people you think, oh, they're not going to make it, somehow are able to continue to be intentional and committed. So that just speaks to me about this mystical, transcendent, this unquantifiable thing about love and connection and attachment, that it goes beyond what we can actually see.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense to me. I mean, even as persons, right? Like, we are greater than the sum of our parts. We're all made of atoms and molecules, but talking to you, Grace, you are more than that. There's a personality there that's hard to identify materially. There's some intangibles there. So I think starting with, okay, there is something beyond the five senses. And I got into a little bit, I went old school with some C.S. Lewis, right? And into into the Chronicles of Narnia. And I haven't really revisited C.S. Lewis a whole lot over the past 20 years, but I'm kind of intrigued about revisiting some of my influences. And I talked about the scene in The Silver Chair where the witch is trying to convince and cast a spell on the children so that they no longer believe in Narnia, in this overworld. And it's a fascinating scene, right? Being sort of her trying to convince them there's no such thing as the sun, there's no such thing as Narnia. And I feel like our culture often is sort of indirectly, that's the message. There's nothing except the material world here and now. And if we come to believe it, then it's easy to fall in line with the cult of speed and just, the only things that matter are material things.
Absolutely. I would also connect that idea that the witch's seductive voice is the voice of our society, sometimes culture, and even familial expectations that can absolutely trap us in this never-ending pursuit of productivity. How can we break that spell, Brad, of capitalism, materialism, hyper productivity? You talked before about, an acceptable addiction is work, being a work addict. And it's like, how do we start to break that spell?
Yeah, and so the heaven thing's a bit of a setup, right? It's a way, a framing of seeing the world. And when you think of that Sabbath, an ancient Hebrew idea, right, that Christians then adopted as well. But this is, ancient wisdom, a group of people who are enslaved. When they are free, they set aside one day not to work. And this is so that they remember they're no longer slaves. They're not just machines to produce.
Mm-hmm.
There is a necessary day of rest, but on a deeper level, it's a rehearsal, a sketch of heaven. This where everything is good and true and beautiful. We rehearse for that reality. And so one day a week we set aside to do. I don't know if to do nothing is the right way to put it. It's not sort of just hey, whatever, watch Netflix for 24 hours. I think there's some deeper dimensions to it, but one day of rest. And I think the big challenge, and I sort of undertook an experiment this week, is that we often mistake having a weekend or 2 days off with a day of rest. And I just don't think that is the reality. We get caught up and we got to do the Costco grocery run, and there's laundry and dishes to get caught up. Essentially, for me, weekends end up becoming, how do I catch up with the things that I let slip Monday to Friday? And so even then there's sure, you have a day off, but you're not really resting. Does that resonate at all with people you work with? Yeah.
Yeah, personally and professionally, absolutely it does. Many people sort of long for that 4-day weekend, right? Like I know I do. It's like, ooh, an extra day. And in theory, it's supposed to be about rest, especially in September in Canada. There's the Labor Day is supposed to be a day off of work. And, folks are traveling and doing all these extra things that we normally wouldn't be able to do during the week. And without intention, it absolutely can become this train wreck of activities. And you're leaving the extended weekend even more stressed out than when you began. And so I think also I would agree with you that regular weekends without intention are just going to be a pileup of additional activities.
Yeah, I confessed this past Sunday that my partner Kristen does more of the domestic duties. I don't think it's a wild split, but it would definitely lean in her. But I did the entire everybody's laundry on Saturday. It took me the whole day, Grace. It was just, I think I did 8 loads of laundry in total. And checking in, you got to wait till the laundry's done, turn over the loads. And it made me appreciate what my wife Kristen does a lot. Absolutely. But just this idea that we can be off work technically, but still not really off. And that's just one aspect. There's also, like I said, grocery shopping, getting the kids places. And with technology, we're still connected. Yes. And so we've lost the ability to actually rest.
And the word I'm going to keep repeating is intention. Whether it's a weekend or vacation or a retreat, which is something I've begun to practice, an annual retreat at the dismay of my partner Billy Joe. Lots of talking and lead up to that weekend when I'm going away to just turn, unplug, reflect, and refresh and renew. Without intention, it's just not going to work. And so, Sabbath may seem like an outdated idea or concept, but it's still relevant today. And I would say even more so. You talked about technology and all of the things that are encouraging us to speed up and go faster. And so I love this idea of Sabbath. It's, if I'm going to be even more transparent, I think back to my childhood where Sundays was the day. I grew up in a very legalistic, conservative background, Plymouth Brethren, its origin. And we were not allowed to do anything on Sunday. We could, fix a meal and it was going to church, and then we had to rest. Like literally, we couldn't go to our friends and play, watch TV. It was like you're in your room. So napping was a forced activity, which now as an adult I can appreciate.
Yeah.
But then it was just like, ah, the self-imposed, by my parents. And then church in the evening. And then it was like Monday was school. And so, and my youth very much feeling that that was forced on me. It wasn't the way I wanted to spend my Sunday. But then as an adult, now appreciating choosing at least one day of the week where you're coming away from your usual activities to be intentional about resting, whether you choose to nap or not. And I loved in your sermon how you talked about real nap under the covers, like, ooh, so cozy and exciting. But
Yes.
whether you choose to nap, but still your mind, still your devices, still your body, not constantly being in motion is so incredibly important.
It's interesting, Grace, that we have very similar experiences. I remember forced naps as well, and it felt like torture. And this is the interesting thing with anything that's designed as good. It can be distorted and perverted very, very quickly. And we see this actually in the life of Jesus. He calls in Matthew 11, right? Come to me, all you who are weary, and I'll give you rest. And then immediately after that, there's two stories about the Sabbath, and he is getting taken to task by the religious authorities about the way he practices Sabbath. So in one case, it was allowing his disciples to eat, pick some food, and the other was because he was healing. And it's a great reminder that something even good like the Sabbath can become too strict. And I think for some of us growing up in church world, Sabbath actually felt like the worst day of the week. Church in the morning, forced to nap, can't play, see anyone. Church in the evening is like, that's not a day of rest. That just feels like a day of restriction. And then Jesus reminds us that the Sabbath was made for humanity, not us to follow some arbitrary rules. And so I think reclaiming the Sabbath is, and like you, Grace, I'm like, absolutely. I couldn't appreciate it as a child, but napping now, what a gift. What a gift that is. That might speak to our age though, Grace. I don't know. But reclaiming it, what it was supposed to be, which is a chance to not feel the pressure of having to be productive. And in that, I think there's a wide berth of things. Of course, friendship and community would be part of that if you wanted to rest, play. There's a lot of people who will sum up Sabbath, in sort of different ways. And one I've heard is pray and play, right? Those are the two distinctives. But that I think is a really important thing. And yet when you start to break it down, like, hey, this is a day to rehearse for heaven. So imagine whatever the good, the true, and the beautiful is for you, hiking, a nice meal, some wine, whatever that is, rehearse it on that day. And yet, even when you break it down like that, I find convincing people about Sabbath, a day off, is a really hard sell. And that's shocking to me.
And it is shocking because there's so many people who are in burnout, rapidly approaching burnout recovery. So we're all experiencing, or the majority of us are experiencing the impact of overproductivity. Why are we so resistant to this idea of rest? Have we been seduced by society and, being overproductive is now the norm, so that it is such an incredible dissidence when we're called to rest and reflection? Do we believe that, yogis, like they're the only ones who can be, I am a little perplexed.
Yeah.
Why? What is this belief system that we're operating under where rest is such a resistant concept? It is fascinating.
Well, I wonder, I want to pick that apart and then maybe get into practicalities with Sabbath there. But for me, there's a bit of one of the things that makes Sabbath hard, there's a bit of an addiction to knowing you're needed or wanted. So, an email or, hey, I have to keep working. It sort of scratches maybe a bit of an itch that I'm needed. There's also the fear of missing out, right? And, that's become a bit of an issue at home. You hear that ding, you can be, in a life-giving conversation, your partner, kids, whoever, but you hear a message come in. It's like, oh, what is it a funny joke? Is there some breaking news? What's going on? Right. So all those things maybe keep us away from it. But at least theoretically, you would think it would be something that people would want to embrace wholeheartedly.
Well, this is where it's a little confusing, because when you think about the commerce side of, stepping away, vacations, the amount of vacations, all inclusive, the price is going up, 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 up.
Mm.
I had the beautiful luxury of going to a weekend retreat with my partner, Billy Joe, for his birthday. I'm not going to tell you how much we spent per night to be in this beautiful place off looking the Grand River. When you think about all these like retreat spaces, the cost of us stepping outside of our norm is like skyrocketing. And so it's like, clearly, at least consumerism has picked up on our desire to step away. So why is it so hard to try to do it at lower scale, on your weekend, just one day, choosing to do Costco earlier and then, rest? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. And, I sort of suggested for maybe most people, I know this won't work for everyone. In fact, it doesn't even work for me, given my work schedule. I'll get into my own rhythm in a second, but I had suggested a noon Saturday to noon Sunday as a 24-hour period. And I think there's some good there. I think most of us go into the weekend going, whoa, I can't, there are things I have to get done. Well, that still allows you Saturday morning. Okay, you got to get out, do the grocery run, or go whatever, Canadian Tire, some house stuff. You still have that morning, and then you still have Sunday afternoon, but it allows you right in the middle of the weekend, that 24-hour period, to shut things down and be off the clock. Leave the laundry. If it's in the washer and needs to, that's fine. Nothing for 24 hours. I think that's feasible.
Well, it would be feasible if one is intentional. And, if you're starting this experiment, Brad, and I hope that you are, one of the things I would suggest, and this is what I would suggest, even therapeutically, is start the experiment, be curious, not critical. What are the barriers to the thing? So rather than is like, it didn't work, it's never going to work, take some time and reflect on what are the things that got in the way of me continuing with that 24-hour period of rest, signing off and that sort of thing. And then with that knowledge, you can create other action steps to help you be able to navigate that 24-hour period when you're turning things off.
Yeah, and for me, my specific is Friday at 5 p.m. till Saturday at 5, though it's a little sneaky because the Leafs game Saturday night, and I probably won't miss that. So I get a few extra hours, but I try to do that because for me, I had found myself, I was constantly working towards Sunday morning. So it was, go, work Saturday for an hour here or there, Sunday morning. Now, for me, it's everything's done, and I don't pick up things again until Sunday morning. Now, what I've just discovered recently is it still wasn't quite working for Kristen and I because of things like laundry. So during the week, okay, so now we've got all day Saturday is spent doing laundry, plus taking the kids places. So there's some tweaks that need to happen there. And I recently read, I don't know if you have heard of her. Her name is Tiffany Schlein. She's written a book called 24/6. And what she suggests is she's suggesting a Sabbath, but also a technological Sabbath. So she and her family turn off all computers, all phones for 24 hours. It's a true fast from technology. So I'm intrigued by some of those practices, but maybe speak again, Grace, about, you've talked a lot about intention, but maybe some of the reflective process that goes on during Sabbath.
And so, I think the first thing is to recognize the need for Sabbath. And often when clients come to me, one of the words they use to describe how they're feeling is overwhelmed. As soon as I hear that word, I know that this is a boundary issue. This is how am I prioritizing my time? How am I living inside of my values? And so I encourage an activity audit. And They literally will sit in session, pull out their calendar, both paper or digital, and then say, okay, what's on your calendar? You know, and very quickly they can see the things stacking up in the course of a day, in the course of a week, in the course of the month, you know. And then I use another imagery and illustration, which isn't mine originally, but I use it. It's how do you fill a jar with rocks, pebbles, and sand? Okay. And the answer is start with the rocks, the big things, add the pebbles, and if there's any remaining space, the sand will fill it in. And not only this is a reflection about values, but it's also about my priorities. The things that I value most, they go into the jar first. After that, the things that I value that are good to have go in next. And then might be nice is the sand. And sometimes we get those priorities mixed up. And so is it valuable to keep a clean, tidy home, clean laundry? Absolutely. But if you compare that value against family or side to side with family, which is going to be the priority and how do you live that out? Brad, as one who's further down the path for you in terms of parenting, there's always going to be laundry. There's always going to be housework, but they're not always going to be moments with sitting with a child, playing a game, running, playing tag, walking in a hike in nature, holding space for their curious questions about the world. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Grace, that feels so important to hear. And we all need reminders of that because, and it speaks to as well the intention of reflecting on what's important. And I would consider that part of the prayer side of Sabbath. So,
yes,
it's easy to think of Sabbath as, oh, okay, a day to do nothing. So I guess I'll just watch TV all day. But there's a spiritual element. It's not just physical rest. It's also, Jesus, he gets in trouble for healing on the Sabbath. And he says, no, that's what the Sabbath day is for. And I think that there's something about our own healing. Yes, we rest physically and don't produce, but also time spent thinking about how do I need to heal? And maybe I need to worry less about laundry and consider more that my big rocks in life might be time spent with kids or time with my partner. So I think there's a reflective part there. And the gift of having one day a week to do that, even if it's just a few hours within your Sabbath, but time spent going, okay, I lost the plot maybe a bit this week, how do okay, let's take stock so I go forward next week healthier.
So you're a hiker, right?
Yes.
And we talk about paths, and I love also, I was thinking about this the other day, and both of us have this imagery of journeying, right? Journey with Grace Counseling, and talk about the Jesus path, like so much imagery.
Yes,
so much
imagery.
Exactly. But you're a hiker, and I don't do much hiking. That's just not my thing. But the thought I have is, let's say you're going on a path, okay? And you can see my destination is there. If you go off by 1 inch, okay, come off the path by say an inch, and then continue on that inch going forward, you're going by the time you reach where your destination should have been, you're going to be miles off course, right? Absolutely. Only an inch took you to a whole new different place. The beauty of a weekly Sabbath is a recentering every week to make sure you're on the path in alignment with your values, whether it's spiritual values, values related to family, all relationships, work. The weekly Sabbath helps you recenter and get you back on the path that you truly want to be intentional about.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to get into next week, Grace, some of the bigger, like you mentioned here, you have this, I forget if you said it's quarterly or yearly, like you've got this time away. Annual, right? Okay. So I think there's rhythms beyond the week. We'll save that for next week because I do think the focal point is the weekly rhythm. Everything else flows out of that. Daily rhythms, quarterly, annual. But I was struck in my a sermon, I mentioned a quote from, I don't know if you remember Roger Ebert, famous film critic, right? And in his biography, Life Itself, he had this line that I thought was telling. He said, "I have filled my life so completely that many days there's no time to think about the fact that I'm living it." And that really struck me because I think it resonates for a lot of us. You can fill your calendars with rock, sand, pebbles, and then you just get on that train, and rarely do you have time to stop and think, what am I doing here? What's important to me? A weekly check-in. What a gift to have, to give ourselves that time to slow down, course correct. I love that idea. You're right. 1 inch off and you'll be in a very different place if you keep following that. So weekly chance to just course correct, make some minor changes. And then, of course, yes, there's times where a weekend away annually going, okay, let's think about the next 5 years or this next year, but what a gift to ourselves and to others.
Absolutely.
To use that.
And when we take time to reflect, reassess, reprioritize values on all those things, we are actually better people. We're not internally, mentally moving at the speed of light in a chaos, frenetic feeling. And so there's so much richness in this concept about Sabbath, daily, weekly, monthly, annually. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I hope, for our listeners, maybe I think the question, how I like to always pose it is, if, start with a heaven frame. If we imagine heaven as God's realm, it's the place where good, true, and beautiful things exist in perfection. So what does that look like? And what would it mean to live 24 hours into that? Some of it might be hockey. Sure. Hey, you love hockey, you love sports. There's nothing better than that. Maybe a great meal, a nap. Absolutely. But again, then it's on us to think about, okay, what does that look like for me? It doesn't have to be the same for everybody, but I would say some fun, some play, but also some self-reflection time to just course correct yourself a little.
Agreed. What an invitation.
Yes.
What an invitation. Well, I'm looking forward to our next one, Brad.
Yes, as am I. Always fun chatting with you. We'll keep it going next week.
All right. See you next time.
Take care, Grace. Bye-bye.
Bye.